Well, let me tell you a little bit about Evans. She's a fascinating lady. In the 20 years that she's been actively involved in the consciousness movement, Evans has been able to study with many wonderful teachers. She studied tarot and mediumship, as well as mastery with Rachel Sally, Egyptian mythology, theosophy, channeling and sacred sites with Paige Bryant, Native American shamanism with Peter Calhoun, and even Peruvian shamanism with Amaru Lee, not to mention Egyptology and astrology with Mary Lamando. And in the last 10 years, Evans has hosted internationally recognized teachers, shamans, and intuitives, and she also organizes small group educational visits to sacred sites. And her website is theperpetualpilgrim.com, and there's lots of wonderful information on there. It's a site that I follow, so do check out the site, theperpetualpilgrim.com, and sign up for Evans' blogs and newsletters. Well, Evans, welcome to the show.
Well, good to be here with you, Stephen.
Wonderful. It's great to have you back again. It's been about 18 months, I think, hasn't it?
Yes, about a year and a half.
Absolutely. Well, time flies. Well, it's wonderful to have you here again, and I'm so excited that we're going to speak about Thoth. And I was debating with somebody how to pronounce the name, because I think some people say Thoth and others say Thoth. How do you pronounce the name?
I have always said Thoth. And
Thoth.
I think the others are correct, but if you go to Egypt and you talk to the Egyptians and you talk to the head of the antiquities, they say Thoth. So that's good enough for me.
It sounds really authoritative, doesn't it? Thoth.
Yes.
Stand up and be... Prepare yourself, Thoth. Well, Evans, Thoth has other names, doesn't he? So can I start by asking you to tell us about Thoth's other names and his origin?
Oh, I'll be happy to. His actually most ancient name is Tahuti. So every once in a while you'll see that name, Tahuti. But we know him in his Egyptian form as Thoth. And sometimes he's even referred to as Thoth the Atlantean. So that kind of suggests that his incarnations go way back before our written time to Atlantis. And the version we call Thoth is he was before the gods. They say he was born out of the primal waters. And so he was actually already in Egypt because he brought the written language to Egypt. He was already in Egypt. But we also know him as several other really important names. One is Hermes Trismegistus, or the thrice great Hermes, which is his Greek form. And in his Greek form, we know him very much as the great alchemist. And you will hear people refer to Hermetic texts or Hermeticism, and we'll talk a little bit more about Hermeticism later. And then he's also the winged god Mercury, the Roman version with the wings on his shoes. And as that is the Mercury, he is the messenger of the gods. He has a counterpart in Egyptian mythology, which is the goddess Maat, who is truth and justice. And then his consort, or what we might call wife, is Seshet. And she is also a goddess of learning, and she's a star goddess.
And when we think that Thoth did incarnate in many different forms at different times, do you feel that's correct? Is that your understanding?
Yes. And you can also look at it as Thoth is an energy, and as our times changed and as our cultures changed, he had these incarnations. To the Egyptians, Thoth was a man with the head of the ibis bird, and that spoke to the ancient Egyptians, who probably came out of a more shamanistic culture that was their pre the written word, and so they would have identified him as the bird man. And then as he came in toward the Greeks, he became a male figure. We see Hermes as just a man. So that's why he has different kind of incarnations. And a lesser known incarnation is as the biblical character Enoch. That's also considered a Thoth incarnation.
Ah, how interesting, because we had a radio show a few weeks ago in which we mentioned Enoch, the book of Enoch.
Right.
We were told that there were actually many books of Enoch, but only several were saved at the time of the Great Flood. So, as Enoch was apparently the person that brought metaphysical knowledge, that carried incredible metaphysical knowledge, does that seem correct given what we know about Thoth?
Yes, because from my understanding in the readings and studying I've done, Enoch was also called the Great Initiator, and he was believed to have initiated Moses and Solomon, two of the people in our history we consider some of the wisest men, into the Hermetic knowledge, and they were Solomon and Moses were Hermetic adepts. So he played that role during the biblical times.
And so you mentioned Hermeticism.
Yes.
Is he, because of the name Hermes, responsible for Hermeticism?
Yes, because let's talk some of his roles, some of the original information, or what Thoth brought to the world was wisdom and knowledge and writing, medicine, math, geometry in particular, and law. So Thoth was the originator of all the written word, and he brought with him the wisdom, what I consider the wisdom of the stars, with him and wrote them down. So he had the original knowledge of the stars and what we were here on this earth to do. And that then transformed through the ages, because the Greeks had so much influence and used the word hermetics instead of going back to the word Thoth. So we have some of the major works that we know of are the Emerald Tablets, the Hermetica, and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. All of those are attributed to Hermes and Thoth.
And what about the tarot cards,
Oh,
Evans?
well,
because I
read
that one of the theories about the tarot deck is that it's
tarot is the Book of Thoth also. And it's the Book of Thoth in pictorial form, because symbolism goes into our psyche or our unconscious much easier. And I was just reading, someone called the tarot the unbound book of Hermes, and I very much agree with that. And I feel that Thoth is the great author of the tarot.
You do?
Yes, absolutely.
So when we're working with tarot, and well, in my view, astrology, we are working with Thoth and the knowledge of Thoth.
Absolutely, because if you know much about or study tarot, the major cards are the soul's journey through life, and that's the kind of our whole lifetimes, and that's kind of the whole point of our incarnation, is to learn the lessons, and the tarot lays out the lessons everyone must go through in order to reach the enlightenment, which is the world card completion, and then we start the cycle all over again. And that's kind of the whole point of the information that Thoth brought to the world.
And so what do you feel Thoth represents for us nowadays in the 21st century? The same
I
things?
I think he does much for us. First of all, the Hermetica, the Emerald Tablets and the Hermetica, have majorly influenced Western civilization. Western civilization, I'm not talking about the East, the Asia, the Buddhism and the Vedic. I'm talking about the Western, what we call the Western mystery tradition, which came out of Egypt and branched off into Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. All of that is influenced by Hermes and Hermetica. And the great literature of our Western culture is Hermetic. Our great authors were influenced by the Hermetica. Sir Walter Scott even translated the Hermetica. The Hermetica, and we know our founding fathers were greatly influenced by the Hermetica. We see it in the symbols of the United States. We see it in the doctrine of our Constitution, and so we can even say that the Hermeticism is the cornerstone of our Western culture.
And how best do you feel we can learn about Thoth? Which sources do you recommend?
Oh, I have quite a few sources that I really recommend. One is an old classic called The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. That one's been around a long time, but it's an excellent way to tap into the wisdom of Thoth and going back into looking at the influences throughout history that were not necessarily well known, but were there underground. What happened was the Greeks when they took over Egypt 2,000 years ago, burning the Alexandria Library, tried to wipe out this knowledge of Thoth and Hermes, but some of the books were saved and were kept in secret schools. So much of the knowledge was underground, and it's just now that it can come out. But if you want to go directly to reading Thoth's work, there is you can buy many versions of the Hermetica. You can buy versions of the Emerald Tablets. You can buy the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I particularly like a version called Awakening Osiris. And then another very good explanation of the Emerald Tablets is one called the Emerald Tablets, Alchemy for Personal Transformation by Dennis Hawk. I highly recommend that book.
And did Thoth, was this information, these writings, were they channeled by individuals from Thoth, or did Thoth actually write them himself? Or do we even know?
That's a little bit of a mystery, but I believe the original works of the Books of the Dead and the Emerald Tablets, I believe those were written by Thoth. And then I think modern day literature that talks about Hermes and Thoth, I like to think of it as tapping into that stream of energy. There's an energy stream that holds that ancient knowledge in the Akashic records, and we give it a face. We call it Thoth, but it is a stream. And I think when we obviously the great writers, even Shakespeare, tapped into those streams of knowledge, and I truly believe, I have no evidence of it, but I truly believe that Thomas Jefferson was really tapping into that stream of Thoth when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And the evidence to me was the fact that he wrote it so quickly. It kind of came to him as a whole. To me, that's tapping into that knowledge.
So we could, in effect, meditate on the energy of Thoth and potentially learn in meditation.
Oh, absolutely, and get some more of those information. There's a couple other really modern influences of people that I really see as being influenced by Thoth, and one is a Cherokee Indian that used to live, that was from my part of the country in East Tennessee, and his name was Sequoia. And you see pictures of Sequoia. He holds a tablet. He has a turban on his head. And Sequoia was the first person to come up with an alphabet. In thousands of years, he came up with the Cherokee alphabet. And when he was doing the final work on it, he said that the sounds of the birds told him how to write the sounds of the alphabet. And that, that's Thoth. And he was so accurate in this alphabet that the entire Cherokee Nation became literate within months. Now that's Thoth at work. That is tapping into that stream of knowledge in a modern day.
I remember once, Evans, when I was a kid, my mother, in the UK, we used to hang washing the clothes to dry outside in the summer and the spring. And I remember my mother always used to do that early in the morning before we all went out, before I went to school. And I remember she came into the kitchen from the garden one day and said, I was putting out the clothes and a bird spoke to me. And I said to her, what? And she said, seriously, there was a bird that landed near the washing line and it spoke to me. It had a voice, it spoke to me. And still to this day, when I ask her about that, she says, it did.
Yes.
And my mother's not a crazy character. She's quite a conservative, logical person. She's not somebody that just believes anything that she's told. And certainly she's quite skeptical when it comes to metaphysics. But she insists that this bird spoke to her.
Yeah, and I very much believe that the birds are the messengers, like Mercury. They're the messengers of the gods. They have wings, and but when I read that at Sequoia's museum, I thought, boy, was he tapping into that universal knowledge. And then I wanted to tell you another really modern instance where I really see Thoth's influence, and that's in the Harry Potter books. My kids happen to be the whole Harry Potter age, and when you hear the story that J.K. Rowling says, it came to her as almost a complete story that she wrote down, and then she developed it from then. But Thoth is the god of magic. And how better to change and remember the magic and to bring magic back into our consciousness after being wiped out for hundreds of years since the Inquisition than to bring it back into children's literature. And to me, the Harry Potter stories are the work of Thoth, reminding the children, sending a whole generation into the magic and the mysteries of our world. And Thoth could not have gotten that to the adults. He worked it through the children through a story. So I personally think that the Harry Potter stories are the training manual for these new star children, the indigo children, and it's the work of Thoth.
I do agree with you on that. I think that that those works are incredible and really are teaching kids and adults to open their minds to what's possible, what's available to us.
And Harry is initiated. He through his experiences, he becomes an initiated human.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Evans, I know that you've spent quite some time in Egypt. Could you tell us a little bit about any monuments or sites in Egypt that are dedicated to Thoth or that seem to carry the energy of Thoth?
Well, Thoth permeates every aspect of Egypt. There's not so many statues of Thoth, but after my first trip to Egypt, I realized that Thoth was becoming prominent in my life. And so the second time I went back to Egypt, I really looked for him everywhere I could. And so I found him on the walls of the temples every time I could, and you see him initiating people. He's pouring the living waters over them. And in the temple of Edfu, the Edfu text, those are the works, the wisdom of Thoth. In the temple of Karnak, it was one of my favorite because the upper part of Thoth still has its original colors, and that to me is beautiful to see a bit of what the glory of Egypt was. But one of my favorite pictures of Thoth is in Abydos, and there's a picture of Thoth holding the original caduceus. And I wrote a blog post just for this show with pictures, with those pictures, the pictures of Thoth in Karnak and the pictures of him in Abydos, so people could see, what he looked like in Egypt.
And what did he look like? I know you mentioned Hermes and the wings. You mentioned the head of the ibis.
Ibis. Mm-hmm. Yes, Thoth in his Egyptian form is a man with a bird head, and the ibis is a bird that has a very long, thin, curved beak, very thin. And he's shown that way. From my thinking, one of the reasons he's shown as an ibis bird is because that thin beak almost looks like a stylus, like you could write with it. But it also reminds you of the crescent moon. And Thoth is a lunar god. He is a mediator between the earth and stars, between God and man. So on his head, he has the lunar crown. And you also see him holding a tablet in the stylus or pen, so that he is ready to take down all the information to write. He is ready, and that's what I was saying in the pictures of Sequoia. He's holding a tablet ready to write, and it just so reminds me of Thoth. Every once in a while, you'll see Thoth represented as a baboon, but almost always you will see him as an ibis.
Now, you mentioned Sekhmet as well, Evans. Can you tell us a little about Sekhmet?
Well, Sekhmet, Sheshat is his consort, but Sekhmet is one of the other great goddesses of Egypt, and she is a lion-headed goddess, and this is also part of that kind of shamanic taking on the look of the animal to help portray. She is the protector goddess that when the people of Earth were acting up, the sun god Ra sent her down to get everyone back in line, but she kind of got a little out of control till they fed her some wine and got her to calm down. But she is the fierce protectress of Egypt and the lion-headed, and she is there when we need help and protection.
So we can call upon her for protection, as we could call upon Thoth for knowledge or Hermetic education.
Correct. Thoth has another very important role in Egypt that I really wanted to make sure we talked about, and that is in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is their scrolls that they used to put in the sarcophaguses when people were died. And it was like a map. It was the instruction manual on how to get through the underworld, which the Egyptians called the Duat. And in those manuscripts, there's a picture of Thoth, and he oversees the Egyptian version of the Judgment Day, which they call the weighing of the souls. And after someone dies, the heart is taken and weighed on a scale by Ma'at, the goddess of justice. And Thoth looks and checks to see if during that person's lifetime they had done the work they needed to do. And if they had lived a true life, done the good things that they needed to do, and stayed in alignment with the gods and the principles of the religion, then their heart was light as a feather. and when their heart, and so Thoth would notice this. They could move on to the stars if their heart was light as a feather. So you see Thoth overlooking this judgment, writing it down in the Akashic records. And if their heart was not as light as a feather, they got to go back and do it all over again. So it was very important to the ancient Egyptians to live a good life.
So that they didn't have to come back.
So they didn't have to come back. Yes, and the principles that they were to be taking on, being kind, being just, being loving. If you go back to the Book of the Dead, those are the same principles that we were then given by Moses as the Ten Commandments. Very similar wording. So these things come down to us through our history, through our Western culture.
It's interesting that so many of the tales we tell, fairy tales and the legends, they seem to carry a lot of truth.
Yeah, well, they are the truth. They are the way the subconscious can absorb the stories that we need to go. They go deep into the subconscious rather than just kind of sitting on the surface. And as a child, I was not allowed to read fairy tales because we were a very conservative Christian family, and fairy tales were a lie. And how much I missed from not reading the mythology, not reading the fairy tales, because those inform our brain and subconscious about the bigger stories, the bigger patterns of why we are on Earth, not the small, narrow, materialistic version of life that our mass media and our more rigid religions show us. So these mythologies.
Do you feel that people generally know enough about these ancients, and that there's value in sharing much more information about, for example, Thoth and these different entities and energies?
The medieval church, which just controlled every aspect of life, removed a lot of this from our lives. The Greeks destroyed the library. The Christian church clamped down on any kind of secret knowledge, underground knowledge that the Hermetic held, because that allowed them to have more control. If you believe in these secret stories of Hermes and Thoth, then they don't have as much control of you. So what was done to the population was taught that there's only this outer world. There was no inner world. And through the stories of mythology, through the understanding of the gods, it helps you almost make a bridge between the outer worlds and inner worlds. And when you read this mythology and you talk to the gods, you are bridging this inner life.
And we seem to be increasingly disconnected from the inner world, the inner life.
Yes. There was always threads. There was always little pockets that kept that inner life going. And, we see them in the saints. The saints knew that. And we feel more comfortable in our modern life talking to saints, talking to great deities. But we can also tap into the stories and the energies of these ancient Egyptians, God, and realize that our true knowledge is from Egypt. That is ground zero in our Western culture. And if we can go back and embrace that, the Egyptians knew things that we don't know. We still don't know how they built the pyramids. We still don't know how their ceremonies were. And we, by going back and studying and remembering, reconnecting with the source of our original knowledge, we can regain that power that was taken from us during the Middle Ages, and by the Greeks when they came to wipe out Egypt to overtake it.
Well, Evans, in a moment we're going to take a break, but a commercial break just for a moment. But I want to ask you before that. I've been reading that the pyramids are far older, or the Sphinx. Let's take the example of the Sphinx. The Sphinx is apparently far older than archaeologists acknowledge.
Oh, definitely. And
so, how old do you think the Sphinx is, and why are people resisting the truth about its age?
Well, I believe there's evidence that the Sphinx and the pyramids are more like 10,000 years old. The Sphinx is a lion originally, and that reflects the age of Leo. So we're talking 10, 12,000 years ago. And we don't know how the pyramids are built. They have all these theories, but we really don't know. When you go and you stand in those places, we do not to this day have the technology to build the pyramids. So how could some people who had ropes and pulleys possibly make those? And what was the second part of your question there?
Why people might be resisting?
Oh, well,
the truth.
That's because the last several hundred years, through literalism of our stories in Christianity and Islam, we believe that those religions say that the world is only 6,000 to 7,000 years old.
Okay.
So, and that's so important to them that they cannot believe that there's something outside of that. Egyptology in Egypt is controlled by Islam, and so things must fit in with their worldview. You cannot be an Egyptologist teaching in the temples if you are not an Egyptian.
Because if we acknowledge the truth, we'd have to rewrite the history books.
Yes, and you wipe out everyone's religion. You have to totally redo your world cosmology, and that's a big task. You wipe out what people know. You wipe out their security. So those of people who want to look ahead can see that, these things aren't what we say they are. But one of the other great things in our culture right now is Ancient Aliens. That show is asking the questions. It's bringing up, it's saying to people, it may not be aliens, but we don't know how these things were built. This is a bigger mystery than we know. And so
Excellent.
I appreciate Ancient Aliens for asking the questions.
I'm going to ask you more about Ancient Aliens, Evans, after the break, because that's a show that I've been enjoying as well. So we'll be back just in a moment.
Okay, thank you.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at psychicaccess.com.
Well, Evans, welcome back. I want to ask you more about Ancient Aliens, and I know that in Ancient Aliens they speak not only of Egypt but other pyramids, other ancient monuments, whether they're in Peru or even in Turkey. I was reading. Can you tell us a little bit more about other locations in the world that seem to be as magical and mystical as Egypt, and maybe places where Thoth may have appeared in other forms? You mentioned Greece and Rome.
Well, he does have other forms. In Native American culture, he is known as Kokopelli, the trickster. I can personally speak. There is a very direct link between Egypt and Peru. And when you go to Peru, there's so many things that look like Egypt. And I was in Peru 2 years ago. And when you go there and you stand particularly in this one sacred site called Ollantaytambo, you look at those monuments, and they're just incredible. They're so big. There's no way we know how to get these up the hill to be where they are. In another place called Sacsayhuaman, my husband, who's 6'5" and a big football player-sized man, is absolutely dwarfed by the size of these stones that are perfectly fitted. So there are some mysteries there of how these monuments are and why they're there. And when I was in Peru, I picked up a book talking about Sacsayhuaman's connection with Atlantis and how they believe that those monuments were built. I've also had quite a bit of gone to England several times and have gotten to stand in the middle of Stonehenge, and those sarsen stones are enormous. There's just no way that we know exactly how they were done. And the ancients just knew something we still haven't figured out.
I read that the only way they could have lifted those stones would have been levitation.
Yes, I believe so. And we have that kind of a place here in America at Coral Castle where they don't know how this man built Coral Castle in Florida. And they believe that he knew the secrets of levitation.
Well, it would be wonderful to know, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I was levitated once by spirit in the morning. I woke up in the morning and I felt a presence, and then my body lifted from the bed. And it happened to my cousin as well in the same room, a different time. But it would be good to know how to actually levitate things. If we had that secret, we'd be able to make some wonderful things happen in the world.
Isn't that true?
Imagine
I know
just
that
being
some
able
of
to
the
levitate
Eastern
an aggressor
yogis know
out
how
of
to
position.
levitate.
Sorry, Evans?
Some of the Eastern yogis know how to levitate, and the great Saint Teresa of Avila levitated, and her nuns had to kind of tackle her and hold her to the ground. So people that get into those high altered states have learned how to manage that. But it would be nice if it was a little more universal.
I always find it interesting that we tend to presume we're moving forwards, that we're improving, our knowledge is getting better, but we don't generally stop to think, well, actually, maybe there's a cycle and we've lost a huge amount of information. I remember being told once that when we experience these mini ice ages, the humans are not as intellectual because the sun and the warmth of the sun is critical to intellectual development. Yes.
Well, and you look at Egypt. This is the big mystery of Egypt, is how did it start high and go low? They forgot. They came in as a fully formed society, and then they crumbled until they ended up in chaos, and the whole knowledge was lost. The Egyptians and the Greeks knew how big the world was. They had figured that out. And by the time we got to the Middle Ages, people thought the world was flat. Now, how does that happen? How do we forget that knowledge? And, we've only known the world was round for 500 years again. That's pretty astonishing.
It would be wonderful to just travel back in time and have access to all of this information that was lost, and
and I think that's what we're trying to do
when
we tap into the energy of Thoth. We're opening those ancient books again. We're saying we want to know. We can enter a relationship with this stream of knowledge and say, I want to know more. And we can read the books. We've got the Hermetica. We've got the Tarot. We have the Emerald Tablets. They're not always the most easy thing to read, but if we really want to know, we can re-enter those streams. And that's
it would be wonderful to do that. Do you think, Evans, that some of the people in positions of influence in our world are aware of these things?
Oh, I think they are, not necessarily calling them Thoth, not necessarily, because that's not the most socially acceptable in our Western Christian culture to say you talk to an ancient Egyptian god. But I think they're very, very much aware of it. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about how to bring Thoth into our modern everyday life is Thoth was the developer of words and language. And he was a magician, and he knew the power of language. And this is how we can also bring Thoth into our lives, is understanding the power of the written and spoken word, and have him influence our communication, because we know that words can heal, and they can also do enormous damage. And as I was thinking about enlightened words and enlightened conversation, which would bring you into the stream of knowledge of Thoth, I was thinking about Martin Luther King and Gandhi. Those men changed the world with their enlightened talk, with their words, with their speeches. And instead of going to war, through their language, they were able to change the world. So I believe those are modern-day people who are using this magic of the words of Thoth to change the world.
I often wonder, Evans, if the sounds that we hear in the media, or the tones that exist in our languages, or that may have been eliminated from our languages, somehow influence us. Maybe they keep us passive, maybe they keep us disconnected, maybe they don't.
Well, it's interesting that you should bring that up, because this is a study that has just come to the forefront, in that I was raised as a musician, and our tuning note in the world, in the modern day world, we tune to A, which is the vibration of 440. That's the hertz that we tune to. Well, I've known this for a while, but I didn't quite understand it. The actual original tuning of our musical instruments was not to 440, but to 432. And you can go online and Google 432, and especially on YouTube, and so much information comes out that that's actually the proper tuning in order to come in harmony with our world. But we listen to music at 440, which causes us to be ever so slightly out of tune. And there's a very interesting, this also came up in my studies, the tuning was changed officially during the 1930s, which was the rise of the Third Reich, and it was changed in Europe. So during that period of time, they caused all of us in our bodies and our music to be ever so out of whack with the vibrations of nature. And it's very worthwhile looking at some of the YouTubes about the tuning of 432. This is some new information that's coming up right now.
How interesting. Do you know much about ancient Egypt and music in ancient Egypt?
I can't say I know a lot about it. There were a great deal of songs, and Hathor, the cow-headed goddess, used a sistrum, which is like a rattle. And she was the goddess of music, and music was really important to the Egyptians. But the Egyptians taught very much about the power of the word, which they call Heka, which is the magical words. And they had a magical name, which they called a Ren. And these things brought power, and you use them carefully to pull the power of magic in the gods. So, and the hieroglyphs have so many meanings. Each hieroglyph has multiple meanings, and they are whole thoughts in those hieroglyphs. They're not just individual words. So they saw words and writing very different from us. They tapped into the subconscious with these symbols versus us using letters that we've learned to read, but are not symbols that go deep into our unconscious.
Do you think that different languages provide access to different states of consciousness or different memories, different connections to spirit?
Oh, I definitely do. I think different languages develop people in different ways, and I think the languages. What's the best way you can say it? When you read about languages, they develop the brain very specifically, and by the use and emphasis of certain words and certain concepts, and you will hear that certain languages don't have major concepts that other languages do. And so we now sometimes borrow words from another language because we don't have that concept in our vocabulary. And I read an article in China, the place where dyslexia is in the brain of Chinese people is in a totally different place than dyslexia in English speakers. And I find that fascinating. You would think it would be in the same part, but it's not.
It's always fascinating to listen to you, Evans. You've got...
Thank you.
I'm not sure if we're having a bit of an audio problem, but in any event, I wanted to ask how they would actually worship this deity physically. Did they give him any offerings?
I'm not sure that Thoth was so much worshipped. He was the intermediary between the gods. So the gods that would be part of, they would have different sets of gods, like they had the Memphis Triad, where they had Ptah and Sekhmet and Nefertum, or Osiris and Isis. Those would have been the gods that would have been worshipped in the temples, but not so much Thoth. He was more of the god that they would see as the writing god, the scribe. So they wouldn't necessarily be worshiping the scribe.
So we were just discussing Mercury. So he was the intermediary, very important, but a neutral figure in essence.
Yes. He was the messenger of the gods, and that's why he had the wings. And in Mercury's hand, you will see him often holding the caduceus, which we now use as the medical symbol. But that is Mercury's symbol, and it's got the wings on the top. But that is Thoth's symbol. And the caduceus is a very important part of how we recognize Thoth, because it is his symbol of learning the enlightenment. The snakes going up to caduceus is like the Kundalini energy coming up to the wings, which take us to the higher realms. And the caduceus also kind of shows us in our modern understanding the DNA that's in our very being. So the symbols of being the same of Mercury and Thoth are very interesting and really tell us the roles that they're playing in our lives.
Yeah, and so this is actually sort of, I didn't know in the Greek structure, and maybe Stephen could cue me in on this as well, was that there were maybe these lesser gods, intermediaries, that were actually very revered and important? Would have be supportive gods to deities? Is that correct?
Yes.
Evan?
Yes, that's what Thoth was.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And like his consort Seshat, she would not have necessarily been worshipped like Isis, but she was very important as she's the patron of architects, and she was the one that helped set the architecture and helped align the buildings to the stars. So there was a lot of gods that just did other jobs because the head gods couldn't do it all.
That's amazing. So they had the organized structures.
Yeah.
And it was a
And that came
simplified
down through the
version.
Greeks too. Zeus was the head god, but we had Hephaestus, who was the builder god, the worker god, and Jupiter, and Neptune. Neptune was the water god.
Yes, I know, and I'm just wondering now with there's going to be a few that are going to be coming up right now with the discovery of more planets, and I was just thinking about the gods that haven't been named, the unnamed gods that may be coming up right now.
They'll have to come up with that.
Wonderful. I mean, I had to ask that. And just as Mercury would wing Steve back in, he's back in the room.
Yeah, I am. I wanted to say thank you for covering for me, Carmen and Stephen. I lost my Skype connection, but thank you to you, Evans. I need to learn more and more from you, Evans, about Thoth, because Mercury's my number one planet in my chart. I have a very strong connection to Mercury, and I'm a Hermetic astrologer, hermetician, right. So I really want to learn more and more from you about Thoth. Yeah. But before we end the interview, Evans, I mentioned your website, The Perpetual Pilgrim, but for our listeners who want to learn more, who want to find out about your work and hear from you regularly, how can they do that?
Well, they can go to my blog, The Perpetual Pilgrim, and I have put up a blog about Thoth for this show with the pictures and a couple of references, and the blog post before was about Sekhmet. There is a contact, and then there's some resources there, including who I recommend if somebody decides they really needed to meet Thoth firsthand in Egypt. And I will be doing some more blog posts about the tarot. I'm teaching tarot classes, and so I'll be keeping up with that, and we now know that the tarot is Thoth.
Wonderful. Well, Evans, absolute pleasure to have you with us again. Thank you for sharing everything you've given us this evening, and we wish you lots of luck with your work.
Well, thank you. I'm enjoying it. It's wonderful to be working with Thoth.
Thank you, Evans. It's great to have you with us.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers, get access, psychic access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.